when most people think about, technology, I don't think storytelling is usually the first thing that comes to mind. But our guest today on Working in Tech will review why it can be a secret to success. With over a decade of experience as a photographer and a branding specialist, Zaakirah excels at capturing and sharing powerful stories that drive both business growth and innovation. A passion for visual storytelling has made a lasting impact across tech and businesses, and I'd like to welcome you to the podcast today, Zakir.
Yeah, thank you, Javon, for having me.
Amazing. So, I think before we got on, you were telling me a little bit about, why you chose tech as, your oyster. Tell me a little bit about that journey.
Yeah, and so the bio can only do so much justice, right? And you only have so many characters online. But I think the biggest thing that brought me into the tech is by a certain lifestyle choice. Technology brings certain freedom and allows you to be authentic in a certain way. And so, a further background of my story, I am also a childhood eye cancer survivor. So, I am only looking at you in one eye right now. The other eye is a prosthetic eye. And I was diagnosed with that cancer when I was 9 months old. And so, as time goes on, I'm in school, and of course, there's certain accommodations that make school a bit easier for me, but as time went on, when I was introduced to a computer between the ages of 7 and 9, my parents realized that I thrive better online, having doing online classes and things of that sort. So that was initially my first introduction to technology, period. First for school. And then I expanded my education into technical school. And so technical school was a photography program. Before it was, we split into two because I took my courses at the turn of a new decade. So the first part of it was, film, looking through a viewfinder, printing out your pictures, right? And then the second half of the school program was utilizing the computer, your Apple, your MacBook, Adobe Photoshop, back when Adobe was the big name. So having my background in photography, the irony of my cancer being detected by a photograph, and my love of computers, and I mean, I have older siblings, but I technically grew up an only child. My older siblings are 7 and 14 and 21 years older than me, so I had plenty of time to get to know a computer, and so technology has just always been intertwined with my career trajectory and even my lifestyle.
That's amazing, and that is such like a touching and inspiring story at the same time, and how you were able to navigate, you know, and almost define the world, in a way that's maybe a little less conventional than most people, and still able to find your voice and find that connection, with photography. So, as someone whose photography has had such a significant impact in your life and career so far, why did that, how did you make that transition to almost own it as a tool to then use to impact other people?
Yeah, so I remember my first paid photography gig. I was still in my photography program in high school, and it was actually a music artist. So a music artist, we had a studio. We had like a portrait studio, and we could start to bring clients in. And so it wasn't necessarily, I wasn't expecting him to pay me because it was for my portfolio anyways. But he paid me like $50. And so I was like, wait a minute, I can make a career out of this. And so not only just the way that I tend to be of impact to others when I'm capturing them through their authentic lens. I think for me, even though I had got a certification in Adobe, I knew I wanted to always make sure that I'm getting the authentic person, the authentic personality. And so over time, I'm taking pictures of music artists, creatives, other cancer survivors. And then I realized as I continue to go back to telling my story and letting them know, like, okay, just so you know, I can only see you in my left eye right now, or just so you know, as a result of the radiation treatment, I lost my hearing just a little bit. So I got to make sure I'm looking at you to fully understand you. They're like, wow, your story powerful. Why don't you tell your story? So, of course, it can start with self portraits, which again is a computer, a phone, a smartphone. I think iPhone was just coming out during this time as well, and also turning that into video, right? It's still being on a computer, not just still photos, but turn that into videos. And so it really just started off with, let me tell people about what it's like being a cancer survivor, and then being inspired by that first and foremost. And so that began the shift of, I'm slowly going away from portrait photography, but then I'm also going into travel photography, and I've gone to like 4 African countries, and most people only know what they know about Africa from National Geographic or the movies, right? So then not only am I showing people what it's like, what Africa is like through my lens, my monocular lens, since I'm only seeing in one eye, and that continued on to different other kinds of digital storytelling mediums.
Mm. And at what point did you make the journey to becoming, also a branding specialist? Like, how did you, you've already started storytelling, just, as part of your lived experience. How did you make that connection to then that side of your career?
Yeah, well, going back to music artists, for whatever reason, music has played a huge role in my life. And so there was a female or a woman identified music artist. And so I had already been learning how to use Facebook. Facebook was just coming out at that time. So I already needed to know how to use Facebook to promote my own photography work. And so at that time, that same music artist was my hairstylist. I was going to get a hair appointment, and I was like, she was talking about, I think she's got to get people to attend one of her shows, or she was performing at a festival or something. And I remember saying to her, "Hey, have you heard of Facebook? Do you use Facebook?" She had no idea what I was talking about. This is when Facebook was first coming out, right? And so the fact that I was very easily able to explain it to her, she's like, "I need you to do that for me. I don't know what you're talking about. I need you to do that for me." That really began the trajectory, right? Before there was even a certification to take to understand what it's like for how to use certain social media scheduling profiles like TeachSpeak. There was one called Coach Schedule at one point, and before Buffer came out, before there were certification programs you could take, I really was telling other people how to use it, or they didn't want to do it themselves, so they would hire me on a consulting or freelance basis to do it for them. So
Yeah, yeah, that sounds really cool. And thanks for everyone for joining. Special shout out to Cuz on Kick. Thanks for all the love. Thanks for all the kind words. So you know, just I think one of the things that I there's so many things that draw people to tech, right? For some people, they're just like very passionate about technology. They want to get on the latest things. They want to build things. For some people, it's the money, right? For you, it was the flexibility, right? And that ability to be comfortable in the space. Can you share a little bit more about that from your perspective?
yeah, absolutely. So I've had the best of both worlds. I have work jobs, I have worked hybrid jobs, I've worked uh as an entrepreneur. Now I choose entrepreneurship. And so this is being recorded during Disability Employment Awareness Month. And so there's going to be a lot more people that are disabled. And a lot of times it's not visible and it's not apparent. So for me, although I'm talking to you just fine, I see you just fine, I can hear you just fine. One thing that most people, especially the human resources department, don't understand is that having uh, less senses of the 5 senses that we normally have, it can cause a lot more fatigue. And so on top of that, I have an autoimmune disorder called PCOS, or polycystic ovarian syndrome, which affects 1 in 10 women globally. So these are invisible things that most HR managers and bosses don't see. And so on top of that, I'm an African American woman. So all these things that at the end of the day, I'll do my best job, but at the end of the day, I'm tired, right? So I chose first, it was just the freelance, the flexibility of freelance, right? I can be a photographer and still on my own time choose when I'm going to go in the studio, choose when I'm going to have my edit days. And even then, when I was working at a photography studio, well known tourist attraction in Nashville, Tennessee called the Grand Ole Opry, it was still tiring sometimes, you know? And but a lot of times what happens is because we just want to get it's hard enough to get a job, right? To be able to make it past those interview stages. A lot of times I would not disclose my disability. So I would just not say anything. They would, you know how they'll ask you, most of the time they ask you on the questions, are you a veteran? Are you Hispanic? Are you disabled? I would say no to all of the above, right? So a lot of times that does play a role in, okay, let me just choose to work remotely. And even then, being more of a brand strategist had me being home more days than if I needed to go into a studio and take a portrait or go to an event and get photo or video footage. So a lot of times choosing a brand strategy, a lot of it is online work unless you're at in-person events, but a lot of it can be Zoom events, podcasts like this, live conversations. So I was able to choose it because it's flexible and I can choose my schedule as well.
And to kind of like double click into that, right? So turning it into something that, people can actually action and leverage is what do you consider like the basis of, being a great storyteller or even branding yourself from a personal branding perspective?
I think what a lot of people forget about when it comes to being a good storyteller is the nitty gritty. You want to skip over.
Mm.
That's not why you watch your favorite movies, right? They watch it because it will talk about the things that you relate to the most. And a lot of times it's hard enough for us to toot our own horn and to brag about the fact that we survived cancer. We are a second generation, college, the fact that we even made it to college, right? So a lot of these things that we don't feel comfortable talking about are the same exact things that people will resonate with you and will actually want to gravitate towards you. And it's the same thing whether it's on offline whether you're networking at conferences like Black is Tech, it's the same way you want to introduce yourself to set yourself apart. You do it online as well. That's the one thing that I feel most people tend to forget about when it comes to telling their stories. And you're not necessarily doing it from a victim standpoint. You're not necessarily doing it from a, look at me standpoint. It's actually what sets us apart is also what will bring us together that most people tend to forget about when they are telling their stories both online and offline.
So, your journey, like, telling stories, you've done it, on, significant stages, Blackest Tech, TEDx stage, and I definitely believe that there's something about you that would make people want to have you on their stages, right? Which shows that you've done the work in building a brand. So, whether we're thinking about it, whether it's like public speaking or even getting a job, how does someone, for example, and mostly people who haven't done it before, right? Because it's easy to go from something to something. It's harder to go from nothing to something. How do you build, the building blocks within your community, within the networks where you want to feature in to be a voice, to get on a stage, right? How does that happen?
I think you said the keyword, community. Every step that I've taken, there was either someone that I know that was doing exactly what I wanted to do, and I was able to introduce myself in a way that said, "Hey, I could see myself learning from you." And I would introduce myself in a way that wouldn't make them feel like they gotta charge me or that I'm gonna take over whatever they're trying to do. But also I would put myself into both virtual and in person rooms with other people who are exactly where I want to be. And so, for example, with every, even once I finished school and I got my photography certification, I didn't stop learning. I continued my education. So I did briefly mention, the certification program. Certain social media schedulers will have certification programs. A lot of that time, that's a Facebook group or a group chat or something where you get to meet with other people. And there were certain accelerators as well when I knew I wanted to really go all in with brand strategy and do it for other people. There was online annual events that I would attend. For example, my audience is women of color. Women gravitate towards me because they do see all of these things that I'm doing and they're like, how do you do it? And I'm happily willing to share. I think that's the other thing too. There's no gatekeeping. When to I can pay attention to the different types of personalities out there, but 9 out of 10 times, each one teach one. That's really been my motto. So the communities, getting into the spaces and the places that you want to be, and make sure that you continuously learn.
Hmm. So, in getting opportunities, right? How is that being like for you? Because I think ultimately, like building the skill is one thing, right? But landing the opportunities, finding the opportunities to be able to put that skill to work, I think that's where a lot of people come up short a little bit. Especially, if I look at, the zeitgeist of the current job market where a lot of people are struggling, the jobs are not there the way they were the way we're partying in 2021, it's not the same thing. So, how is that being like for you?
Yeah, I think it definitely has not always been easy, but I think because I think I start off with, the old traditions of like bartering or the old traditions of just networking next to you, not necessarily the one that has, more money than you, right? Because they're going to be at a different level that you may not be ready to receive. So going back to the old school methods of being social, that is really what's gotten me into a lot of places because I have had a non-traditional career. I've gotten more certifications, and I've from high school straight into multiple certification programs. So being able to network right next to you with someone who's already doing what you want to do, right? I feel like that's the thing. Just talk to the people, and I think that's what happened too. Most people just be afraid to just talk to people. Like there's so many LinkedIn messages, Facebook messages. I would just start with "Hey," right? What do you want? But also be clear on what you want. You got to know what you want too. Why are you reaching out to this person? How can they help you? But not in a way of you do for me so I can do for you. You scratch my back so I can scratch yours. A lot of times that's where it tends to get misconstrued. And that's where you tend to burn a bridge that you essentially may end up needing 1, 5, 10 years later on down the road.
So, if I think about that, because I think there's two sides to it too, right? Because a lot of people would say reach out, a lot of people will say connect, but I know that this is something that has happened to me myself, and I know it's happened to other people where people may not be as generous as you are, or they might not have the bandwidth to even give you what you want at the time that you want it. So how do you deal with that? And maybe to put it more specifically, so let's say you identify 10 people within your network who you think could be potential, or let's even say five. Let's not blow the number up. Could be potential mentors or even co-travelers who could help. And you message all of them and nobody responds. How does someone deal with that?
Well, yeah, that's the first thing. Your first step is mental. You gotta understand that it's a mental game. That the more that you set the intention of what you want to do, the more you'll achieve it. But the more that you don't have an intention, you're just reaching out to 10 random people. No, you're not gonna get responses. And I'm gonna stick with the number 10 because the percentage is that you're gonna reach out to 10 people. It could be zero or it could be one, or it will look like zero and it'll become 1 to 5 because you gotta follow up, right? Because if you weren't clear in your introduction, you weren't clear in your intention, sure it could look like a failure. But I think what happens is sometimes we just give up after the first try, right? So a lot of times people are busy, and other times things get lost in the shuffle, or they don't understand what you wanted, so they're not going to interact or do anything with it. And this is more typically online than offline because you wouldn't walk up to somebody at a conference and be like, "Hey, I want you to get me into this room." They'd be like, okay, why? What makes you think I can do that? Why should I do that for you?" And then you kind of have to answer those questions already, right? Answer the questions that they're already going to be coming to in their mind. Get those questions out there in your introduction, but obviously don't make it so long that they're going to be like, I don't know what you want, so I'm just gonna move on with my day, right? So a lot of times people forget to follow up, forget that people are busy and are not clear and intentional in their requests.
Hmm. So to double click on that, then it almost means like it's not just all shoot and pray, right? Like there has to be a strategy behind it. For someone who's never done it before or who's just wondering how to do it, what would be your best advice, right? What makes a winning message? Again, I know like you might not be able to fully flesh it out, but you know, what are the elements to do? And like, for example, if I'm asking for something, should I lead with that or should I lead with something else? Like, and then is there a sequence? And how many times should I reach out before I become a stalker? Like, I think those are the questions. So, what has worked for you?
Yeah, so I'm gonna go. I'm gonna put on a brand strategist hat just for a millisecond, not a full strategy session because that's what I do for other people. But because let's say we are this is the online conversation, right? And so what's going to happen is more people are going to check you out, check your pages out first. So before you even reach out to someone, make sure you have your mini elevator pitch, or it's something called a help statement of who you help, how you help them, and why they should choose you, right? Who do you help, how do you help them, and why they should choose you. And that should automatically be seen everywhere they go, whatever your digital footprint is online, because that's where we're going to start off 9 out of 10 times, right? And so once that is something that can back up where they see their first question 9 out of 10 times when they're connecting with you or seeing a message from you is who are you? What do you want from me? Right? So if you can answer the question both in that email and on your digital profile, whichever one it is, that can 9 out of 10 times get you in the door. Now, although nowadays LinkedIn and social media, you're adding everyone and anyone, but back in the day, it made sense because they would see who you were actually connected with, and we'd be like, oh, okay, I know that person and I trust that person, so let me see how I can continue to build trust with you. So trust is such a huge factor, but you gotta trust yourself first by saying why other people should trust you by saying who you serve, how you serve them, and why they should choose you.
Hmm. I think that is so, so powerful. And I think because ultimately, people are making an investment, right? Whether it's like they're investing their time, their energy, their effort, a connection, right? Because if they have access to that room or they have access to that stage, they've done work to build that. So it's like, why should they give it to you, right? And ultimately, of course, even if you have everything on point, it still doesn't mean you're going to get it, but at the very minimum, it helps to start with a Korean story. It was actually interesting. I did one of this engagement posts on Threads where I basically was saying, I want to connect with people who are like, UI UX or all these other roles, and someone commented, I'm a engineer, but then I go to their page and then I see, virtual assistant, and there's something else that has nothing to do with that. You know, if I was looking for a back end engineer, or a friend was looking for to partner with, I would never partner with that person, right? Because it's like you're telling me you're one thing, but your profile says you're something completely different, right? And maybe you are all of those things, but it's like it helps to have a coherent message all the way through, right? Because ultimately, I think the winning trifecta is in that post, you tell me you're a backend engineer. And when I go to your profile, I also see that it says, I'm a backend engineer and I've done this projects. And then maybe like it's even pictures of you talking, with your code and saying, crack this or something else. And that gives me this mindset that, yes, this it does, you could be lying still, right? You may not be that, but the chances are now much lower. Why? Because you have a coherent story and it's all tied together, at least for me to want to have that further conversation. And I think that's why that's such a powerful thing. So after like, checking out from that perspective, the message itself, what should he look like? Because if we keep the perspective that this person is reaching out to people who they've never met, why? How do you get a stranger to even care enough to want to respond to your message?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing that I should mention is you need to, even if it ain't authentic, you need to act like you care about them. People love to know that you are acknowledging them from one point or another. Start with acknowledging their conversation. If you saw their live YouTube series, if you've seen their podcast, if you saw their TEDx talk, start with that. So that also lets them know how you got there, right? Because you didn't just show up out of nowhere. Even if it was, oh, LinkedIn suggested me as someone because we're connected to someone, because we're both brand strategists. So I wanted to connect with you. And hi, my name is, this is who I serve, this is how I serve them, and this is how we can best connect. Right? I think we'll just start to connect because, hey, we have mutual LinkedIn friends, let's connect. No, why should we connect? About what? Where's it going to lead to? What do you want? Right? So having those questions in the back of your mind as a part of the message. Who are you? What do you want? But how do you help other people do the same thing that you're asking for, right? And even if I think, I want to rewind a little bit because most people were saying, "Oh, I'm just starting out. I'm just starting out in this industry. I'm just starting out in the tech industry." The reason why you build a personal brand is because you have those stories, those experiences that you've lived through. 9 out of 10 times, it was something very pivotal that you didn't realize. It happened between the age of 7 and 9 years old. So you do have a starting point, whether you are making a pivot or not. So you always have a starting point as far as how to introduce yourself, and get what you want as long as you're clear and intentional in two ways.
Hmm. And I think to just to kind of like get a better sense of how this tend to play out, right? Because I think there's so many. If I think about like the story from, let's say, someone is transitioning into tech and getting their first job, there's so many points in there, right, that require this set of skills. Whether it's like you know building a LinkedIn profile, which is like one of the most important things in tech today, because that's where it's so interesting. I worked with a LinkedIn expert like a couple of years ago, and he said something that I found so profound. It's like, you know, most recruiters basically treat LinkedIn like the Bible or whatever, like authority you want to think about, constitution, right? And that is so important to them. And that's where they spend most of the time. So if you're a candidate, basically was saying this in 2021, he says if you're a candidate in 2021, you have to stand out where they hang out. And I thought that was really cool. So that it starts from there, right? And then the next one goes to, what's it called? It goes to, your resume, right? That's a document that people get to see before they even get to talk to you, meaning that they get to make a decision about you or your prospects for a job before they've even ever had a conversation with you, meaning that you're going to do yourself a great disservice if you're great, but you're not great on paper. You know, that's another element. And then there's the interview process, right? Which is another opportunity to tell a story. So every single stage in the job search process, there's a story to get to the next stage, right? So for people who are starting out and oftentimes don't even have the insight, of what the industry is looking for, how do you find that information to make that story coherent? And then how do you sell that story?
Yeah. So I'll kind of want to use you as an example. All right. Let's do a real life session right now, and then we'll go from there. Okay. So, we're gonna do a little bit of digging. Right. We're not gonna just necessarily think about our accolades. We're gonna think about our life. So, where was little Juwan between the age of 7 and 9?
Uh, I was in school, just learning about the world, learning about, just growing up, essentially.
So, what was the most exciting thing that you can remember? What was something you were introduced to that really excited you?
uh, this requires a lot of thought. So I
Yeah.
think between those ages, uh, it was just, I think I enjoyed fun. I enjoyed play. I enjoyed spending time with friends. I think I didn't have any specific interests. Wait, hold on, scratch that. No, I think it was video games. Video games was the thing. I was very, again, and I think it tied back into the theme, right? So the theme of like, playing, enjoying time with friends. I had my very first experience playing a video game around that time, and I think it completely blew me away.
And so, what was the favorite part about the video game? Were you very fascinated with all the graphics and how you could maneuver the game to win, or was it being able to kind of go into a different life, right, a second life essentially, or was it just the how mind consuming it was? Which aspect of video game did you enjoy?
So I think there were multiple facets to it. It's interesting how this has become a reverse interview, but I'm enjoying it. um, I think one of the things that I really enjoyed about it a lot was, one, my first ever like video gaming experience playing was with my brother, who's like a lot older than me. So he and I, even though like we're not close in any way, like I mean like age wise or experience wise, because he was grown and I was just coming up in the world, I almost like to think that we had like this little rivalry and competition. You know, even for context, like we're both soccer fans. I literally chose my like soccer team in a position to is. Not really because of course I've grown to love them now, but like I didn't like them when I started supporting them. I just liked them to annoy him, right? So I think that was a core part of it, but I think it was everything else too. Like I have a very uh, pictorial like memory, like not just memory, but also imagination. And it was really fascinating to me to see, you know, concepts like combat and things like because like growing up before that, I would you know fake play wrestling with my cousins and things like that. Combat, being a boy too was very like competitive and things like that. So seeing that in a different form was very, I think, fascinating. And I think it was all those things. And I think technology too was a big part of it, right? In the sense that like the medium that brought that experience to me was technology. Because if you think about it, I got excited about wrestling because of like the TV set. But then my experience with it was done once that was over. Then I had to like reimagine it with my cousins and like friends and like fake fight and act, basically fill the gap with our imagination and act like we were really like Hulk Hogan or Warrior or whoever else. But now I got, taken into a new realm, because of this technology.
There we go. And so essentially what it is, it's a shortened version of that. That's what people got to tap into, right? When they're really trying to build, either it's that branch story of why they love technology or why they can incorporate that with their brand, or why they like interacting, like why they like video games so much. Why do you like XYZ, whatever it is that you want to get into. That's where we do have to do a lot of thinking. Sometimes it requires talking to someone because you probably had a light bulb moment that you didn't realize, right? So that's where people tend to forget that they need to find somebody that can get that part out of them to get that story onto any one of their digital platforms. And so I think most people tend to forget about that. That even though you do need to build a resume, it's all about you too. They want to know who you are, right? They look at these athletes because they want to make sure that you can do the work, but they essentially want to know, well, who are you? Why should we like you? Right? The same way for
Mm.
a job, the same way with getting clients, the same way with any interaction on social media.
And where that is so powerful. If I could just add a little bit to that, because I think you had made an earlier point that I wanted to add on to, but I think this kind of like brings it all together. Is that when you talked about do your research on the person and find that point of connection. It's interesting because another guest on the podcast was just literally saying that, 2 days ago. And it's interesting that you're confirming the same exact thing. And I think the way to finally bring that all back home, I think is that last piece that you said, authenticity. One of the things that has become an opportunity, but is now turning into a challenge is that before being articulate was highly I don't want to say respected, but it meant a lot to people because it showed that you had maybe invested a lot of time in your education or learning on your own or whatever else, that your articulation carried that much weight. Now everybody with a finger snap of their finger with AI can write the best line and subject. So even that in itself has almost become a disadvantage because like if it sounds so clean, I'm wondering like, did AI write this? And there's no problem with AI writing it. I think where a lot of people think about it is still an investment. If it costs you 10 seconds to just write this intro to me, how much attention should I give to it? Right? If everything that you've done is like if it didn't cost you anything, why should I? Because if it means too much to you, you would give a lot to it. And I think like it's interesting that this is happening now in real time where it's like people are literally saying, oh, did they send this to me with AI? Or, and now like I almost even try to, it's so interesting that when I write now, I try not to write in polished language. I actually try to sound as a little semi formal if I can, just to show that it's really me, And that's just an interesting piece. It's like personality ultimately, people are not hiring a paper, they're not hiring all of this stuff. It's important to have those, but they want to hire you, and like how much of that can you show? I think that's the point that I got from what you said, and I think that's really powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned generative AI because even I'll just, say right now that one of the next certifications that I'm getting is going to be in a program called Jasper. It's a AI program, but it's specifically for all kinds of content writing. And so one of the first things they ask you when you join the program is what is your brand voice? But you wouldn't know that if you didn't know yourself. You didn't know what your personality traits and quirks are. You didn't know that what makes you different, what kind of slang you use when you write so that you don't sound like anybody else when using generative AI. And so it all just boils down to, your brand, you are your brand. Your brand is also, what people say about you, right? Your brand is also what Google says about you. If you haven't already started being featured anywhere else, your brand is what other people say about you before Google says anything about you. And before you can even put that into a brand voice in generative AI, you got to know, trust, and believe yourself.
So, speaking in TEDx, definitely one of my, goals. I definitely want to do that. Maybe hopefully even one day get on the actual TED stage. But
Well,
you've
if you
done
remove the word maybe, because then it's going to happen.
so you've done half of that, and how did that come about, and how did you build up to that?
Yeah. So essentially, it was 10 years in the making. From the minute, if I rewind a little bit to essentially my story and how people know about me is that a photograph from a camera saved my life. It detected my cancer. And the minute I was able to confidently talk about that online, technically for the last 10 years, I was both doing it online and offline. But I build what I call like a digital footprint online with most of the time. You can look up my brand where it's called See Life Through Different Lens. I started it with a podcast first, Seeing Life Through Different Lens. See Life Differently is the podcast. And then I wrote a book. I wrote a book as an e-version of the book called Seeing Life from a Different Lens. And so essentially, I was able to compile all of those things and also be able to summarize it in a way that's actionable. Because the one thing that's different about TEDx is they want to know like, okay, well, what can other people take away from it, right? So if my theme that I've been talking about for the last 10 years is how I've been able to see life differently, not just because I can see in one eye because my other eye is fake. It's also because of the way that I have been able to bring out the positive in other people, encourage that other people are more positive when it comes to talking about their experiences, because I've had my fair share of betrayal, of bullying, of all of the things, no boundaries being set, right? I've had my fair share of all of that. So one, I feel like that was the easiest part when I did apply. Now TEDx, what most people tend to confuse is TEDx is each state, city, country has their own chapter. The TED stage is where it's based in Canada. 9 out of 10 times that's by invite, depending on how big of a social influence you have. So that's essentially what it was. I know that by the time I was able to um, apply, I was able to confidently apply because I knew I didn't have the word maybe. I'll get it, maybe I won't. I knew that it was my time, but also because I was consistently talking about the same thing over and over. And so essentially, when you look at it on YouTube, the name of my talk is Seeing Life from a Different Lens. And I mainly talked about it from a diversity and disability perspective, but it's the same thing that I've been talking about for 10 years. So, yeah.
That is amazing, and I want to get to my next question. But before I do that, I just want to give shout out again to everyone who's joined us today. I hope you're enjoying the story. Give a like, leave a comment, ask any questions. I think this is so important. Uh, you've been sharing your journey. I think I've learned a lot, especially even like this process of almost self-diagnosing and finding this core memory again. And I think that's something that's definitely very useful for a lot of people who want to craft their stories and be effective storytellers and own their own careers. One of the things I actually, before I ask my next question, I wanted to actually ask this because it came to mind as I was saying that last bit. One of the things that people talk about, like about brands and stories, is that there's always a brand or a story about you, whether like you want to create one or not, you know. So it's either like you're the one actively curating your own story, or you're just letting other people do it for you. How true is that, and how important is it as a professional to own that opportunity if it is true?
Well, it is two parts. To reiterate a comment from before is that your brand is what people say about you, right? And in order for you to really know those core things, you do have to talk to other people. Ideally, it's a good idea to talk to people that know, trust, and like you already before you deal with the people that don't know you, don't know if they'll like you, and don't know if they'll trust you. But then it also goes back to that mindset work that you have to do for yourself. You got to reflect on your own core years, the 7, 8, 9 years old, before you even hit the age of 13. Before puberty, that's when everything was a lot clearer for everybody. So you really, it is a little bit of both where you got to listen to what the people you know, trust, and like say about you, and you got to know which part to believe and understand about you, and combine that. So once that's combined and shortened, that essentially is your brand.
Hmm, hmm, hmm.
But
That
I
that that's so
also add
powerful.
that I can't seem to get away from photography. Like, but people know, trust, and like me for photography, no matter what form of medium it is. Like right now, I mean, I'm just categorized as a content creator, but because of the type of cancer that I have, it's normally detected by some kind of photograph, right? And because of I'm not being a content creator means I'm looking at a moving form of photography, right? So it's also the one thing that you want to get away from, but you can't because that's a core part of you. So yeah,
Hmm. And speaking of which, you've had like a very unconventional journey through the world, right? For most people, most Black people who are breaking into tech, their journeys will also be unconventional. What are some tips that you can give for people who are navigating uncharted territory?
yeah, I am team unconventional schooling, unschooling. I'm all for that. I went to a technical high school where I got both my high school diploma and a certification program. Again, I chose photography, so I had a step into an entry level program into photography, which was in a certain industry. But after that, I just kept choosing certifications. You can get certifications anytime you want. You don't have to be in a certification program for 4 years, not always for 2 years. You can choose your pace for that. So I am team get a go to a technical school, get hands-on skills, join an accelerator program online. 9 out of 10 times, there's always a fiscal quarter where a program is doing it for free. For example, one of the certification programs that I did was um, the DEI certification that the University of South Florida was having at one point. It was like springtime. Every springtime they'll open it up for free, FREE. And the same thing for Bank of America and Cornell University. They had a woman entrepreneurship program, and they opened it up once a year for free, FREE. So continue to get those certifications, catch them, pay attention to them, join the email list for when they're opening the things up for free. Um, but also like I said, there's always certification programs that you can take, which is great. It looks great on your LinkedIn. But always remember that your brand is the core of whatever you decide to do. Your brand is going to be the core of it, no matter what industry you choose.
And as someone who's had success in freelance and similar stuff, one of the things that is so important I understand in that space is just going. It's almost like I was reading an influencer story talking about getting their first ever brand deal. They were like, it was 8 months in the making. Like that's a long sales cycle, just following up, growing, doing all of that just to get to that yes. How important is resilience and like not giving up in the middle of all of this?
Resilience has got to be your middle name, unless you change it to your first name. Resilience has got to be a part of you, one way, shape, form, or another. Especially if you are just as marginalized as either one of us. It's gonna take 8 months. It's gonna take longer than that. There is a quote where people are thinking overnight success is actually overnight, but it's anywhere between 10 to 12 years in the making, essentially primary, secondary school all over again. So resilience has got to be your affirmation word, your first name, your middle name, because you got to have it in you if you really, really want it. You got to have resilience.
Hmm. And you talked about going to Africa, right? That's stepping out of your comfort zone. How you know how did you like it, and how has that shaped your worldview and like even the work that you do?
Oh yeah, I love it. And funny enough, I'm going back, and even for a longer time than before. But I think what happened is I was one of the few percentage of African Americans that understood that that's actually home. um, although I got there. My very first country was Ghana. My second one, I was married for a little bit, so I went to Gambia, and then I also went to Senegal, and then I went to South Africa, and next is Kenya. So I understand that it is home, and I know that every single aspect of the continent has its own unique flavor, but it's all home. So I love it. I'm always going to be one of those who encourages other people to do it. I'm going to be utilizing my YouTube channel for that, letting people know why they should, you know, block off more than 2 weeks and
Zakira, can you hear me? Oh, I think we're having network issues. I think while we wait for Zakira to get reconnected, I've definitely, really enjoyed this session. I think, again, if you're just joining us to recap, I think Zakira has been, hi, we have you back.
okay, sorry about that.
No, that's okay. Yeah, so I wanted to give you a chance to finish your thoughts.
Yeah, so I am team making sure that I am utilizing my own content creation channels to make sure that people understand that work life balance that you're looking for. You can actually find it over there in Africa.
Yeah, that's so true, and I think connecting back to your roots, I think is definitely something that I think there's something there, right? It helps you maybe refocus, recenter, right? And I think it's definitely something everyone should do at some point. Um, so business and technology are two can sometimes be like two different worlds, or it can feel a little like that. you know, Definitely like a lot of businesses that, are now technology driven, whereas like many technologies that started as hobbies, like MySpace and things like that, they've become like serious businesses. How have you been able to marry both worlds, with your passion for storytelling and like, visual storytelling and brand building?
Yeah, well, for me, my story, business and technology has always been there. In order for me to edit the photos that I take with a digital camera, I had to be on a computer and use the internet program, right? Adobe. And then even when I transitioned over to digital marketing in order to be digital branding, I had to use social media scheduling program, which is the technology to trust that your social media post is going to go out there while you are sleeping. And then move it over to um, how the technology that we use now, right? To have these conversations, to take notes, to create content on these lives. So business and technology has always been intertwined. And even nowadays, it's going to be intertwined because a lot of the businesses and brands that you follow, they're utilizing technology in one way or another. I mean, Gmail, Google email is technology because I can't even imagine how we would get across with pigeons or whatever it took before technology. So business and technology is always going to be intertwined.
That is amazing. And so if you think about technology, what is the best mindset, to have to build, I almost want to say career, but because again, that's what this is about. It's like this idea of, black people belong in tech, working in tech, bringing people who work in tech to come share their experiences and hoping that, some click something off in someone, or give someone an extra insight to be able to break into tech and build um, what to build the kind of career that they want to have. And again, and I think why that's important is because, again, as I mentioned, we've always been underrepresented. And the reason why so many people don't even participate is because they don't see themselves in it. So what are the best ways for someone who's, I don't know if intimidated is the right word, or doesn't believe that they belong, to start to understand it? It's almost like, I think you've entered it, but I definitely want to hear the full story. Like this idea of, when I said maybe you said take that out, what are the things that somebody can start to do to own that, or start to feel a bit more comfortable?
Yeah, I was literally about to say, you should not be intimidated by technology because we created technology, technically. Yeah, unfortunately, it is an underrepresented industry, but we started it. We made the technology. We made the tools that allow you to use technology to this day. So first of all, yes, walk into the technology industry like you own it for sure. And then also, I feel like I forgot the second half because that was a long-winded question. So what was the other half of your
Yeah,
question?
yeah. So it's like to feel comfortable in it. And I think we have someone shouting you out just from your YouTube channel.
Oh,
Says,
cool.
"Go Zaakirah." Yeah, sorry. Back to the question is like, how do people feel more comfortable?
Yeah. Yeah, they first of all own it and understand that, your ancestors created it, but also understand that humans made technology. AI would not be here if it wasn't for a human taking the time to understand the psychology of humans. So own it because humans created it, and Black people created it first and foremost. But also think about how you're already using technology anyways. How often are you using your phone to go on social media, to go on YouTube? And how often are you using it to your advantage with, talking to Siri, talking to the Alexas? I hope I didn't light them up. But how are you talking? How are you already using technology just for your everyday life? And now, intertwine that with your own personal brand story, and decide how you want to use it to make money, or make your impact, leave your legacy.
And we have an audience question from Rian. What's the way to build a personal brand even when you aren't really an expert at what you do yet?
Well, first of all, you're already thinking about it the wrong way. You are an expert at what you do. You just got to think about what is that thing you enjoy doing. What is that thing that you could talk about, that some people, your mom or dad, would get bored with listening to. You could go on and on about this, and then you know that you will bore the heck out of your brother, your sister, your mom, your dad. We tend to think about that because we put that 7, 8, 9-year-old away. We let that 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old get so busy and overwhelmed with everybody's opinion, other responsibilities. But you are an expert at it. You just gotta do a little thinking, deep thinking, and think about what that thing is.
I think that's definitely powerful. So, we're coming towards the end of it, and I don't know if we have any more audience questions, but if we don't, I think I'll give you. We typically, do it this at the end where we say, do you have any things you want to promote? I think you mentioned your book at the top. I don't know if there are things. And then any last piece of advice for people who are transitioning into tech, trying to build a career here, maybe even discouraged, like what would you say to them?
I want them to focus on their brand first, right? Because I think what happens is we get so caught up in wanting to get a job that we forget who we are, right? You are your brand, so focus on you first and foremost. And then you never know what could happen, honestly. It could be a job, it could be your dream consulting client. Or it might actually be entrepreneurship, right? You might just be wanting to build your own thought leadership, traveling the world internationally speaking, either from the home, from the seat of your home, and traveling internationally speaking, or whatever it's gonna be. But I feel like I'm unconventional. I'm gonna be the unconventional guest of yours, and just say that people need to focus on their brand first and foremost before even a career, because that's not the only option. Maybe the best option, and maybe the shiny object, but it's not the only one.
And do you have any things you want to shout out? Any things that you want to, people to go check out later?
Yes, they can definitely check out the TEDx talk. So make sure you take a look, search for my name. I'm glad I see people in the comments typing my name correctly. Thank you. So search for my name on YouTube. Search for the TEDx talk, seeing life from a different lens. And that's where you can continue to learn more about me. And I'm also you're welcome to join my email list, because I'm also going to talk more about how people can build their thought leadership, whether that's on their TEDx stages or their own stages. And I'm also slowly joining into sharing certain prompts, generative AI prompts that you can use when building your personal brand to build your online brand. So search for Zaakirah, search for my social media handle. It's ILLUMINOUSONE, which is actually my meaning of my middle name, bright light, since I'm a cancer survivor of cancer that's only detected by a bright white light in an eye. So continue to learn how to also build your personal brand before you even utilize AI, but also understand how I was able to tell my story and how you can confidently tell yours.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Zakira. I think this has been so wonderful, so eye opening. I think I definitely learned a lot about, digging in and finding that meaning, because ultimately, I think even in doing that, just that little exercise, I think one of the things that I realized is that you can only give, externally what you have inside of you, right? If it's not there, then you can't really find it. So, really, thank you for that. Thank you for bringing the message and help. Thank you for helping people think about how they write, shape their career stories, and how that can drive them, to succeed in the tech industry. And of course, you can also say, bye to the folks, but I definitely want to give a shout out again to Cause on Kick was commenting from the first go, and it's literally hung with us till the end. So I really appreciate you, and really appreciate everyone else who's rocking with us and on this podcast.
Thank you for having me, Joanne.
Yeah, thank you so much. And that's the show for the night. We're really excited that you hung out with us. We'll be back again next week with another amazing guest talking about a different topic in tech. And we look forward to seeing you there. Have a great evening.